Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you lovely folks joining me here nice and early over at Marble Snap Zone. Welcome back for another Infinite Decks of the Week series this time around. The first look at the Savage Lands season and what decks are succeeding and getting to Infinite quickly in that season. It's in fact the first installment of Infinite Decks of 2023, and the season is still very brand new, but a few players have already completed the grind to Infinite. For this first installment, we're going to focus on how to grind the ladder and rack up 300 cubes in a short amount of time. So before we dive into the decks themselves, these racers have used, let's discuss what it means to be infinite in 2 or 3 days. Even if you would have an insane cube wait, which quite frankly these players probably did, reaching infinite represents quite some time. For example, if you would manage to hit 2 cubes a game, you still need 150 games, which at about 5 minutes a game represents about 7.5 hours for a full climb. Arguably, you could achieve that in 1 day, and one could say it's maybe less than 3 hours per day of play. Nothing crazy, right? Yet what's important to consider is the focus you need during those games, as you're probably playing a lot of high-stakes games, snapping or being snapped against in many games. So we're not talking about 7 hours of chill play here, of Marble Snap, and trying various cards around in your deck like most of us do. You need to hit a list you're happy with quickly, play sharp for several hours, and accept to stay in high-stakes games often. As a result, this week is going to be about decks that found a way to abuse the early metagame of the Savage Land, either by being surprising enough to draw some unadvised snaps from the opponent, or solid enough to rack up wins and just have this impressive win rate all around. So what are players who achieved such a feat? Who are they, and what decks did they use? Let's take a step and look at these deck lists for the first time this season. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel here over on Marble Snap Zone. Love bringing you this content each and every single day, and I want to make sure you don't miss anything important if you're climbing through the Savage Lands just like me. With all that said and done, let's go take a peek at these first ever Infinite decks of the season. First up, we might have the sweetest deck of this week, Omega Red. Out of nowhere. In the Zabu Theorycraft video we put out, we actually joked about the fact that Zabu could make Omega Red a good enough card to be back in the discussion. Well, Malignant Sin did one better. He actually took Omega Red and cruised into the infinite rank, but with a twist to it. They didn't use Zabu at all. Instead, they relied on the more known build-around of this card. For those who haven't heard about this discrete archetype, the goal is to dominate a single lane with Omega Red on it in order to trigger its ongoing ability. With cards like Iron Man, Onslaught, and Mystique in the deck, it's usually quite easy to win the lane when things go right. The trick is to win it by a big enough margin that you can trigger Omega Red, which should hopefully win a second lane for you in the process. With Zabu logically being very popular in the first few days, Enchantress was more popular as a result, so I'm curious how this deck performed quite so well and if Enchantress was a problem for it all during the climb. If we take Enchantress out of the equation though, this kind of deck should be surprising your opponents, considering it's a very niche archetype. A perfect way of getting away with snapping early, as the opponent can't really figure out why you're snapping in the first place. Up next, we have one we're sure you'll be seeing plenty of in the weeks going forward. Zabu Darkhawk might be your brand new dominant duo. If a lot of us got Zabu, not as many of us were as lucky to get Darkhawk, even though thankfully I already have. And while you might have caught us on Twitter kind of sharing Zabu control builds, definitely Darkhawk feels like the best way to go currently when it comes to abusing this Battle Pass card. The final build is still going to be up in the air as we speak, with many players sharing their unique takes on this archetype. In his climb to Infinite, Alonso Arieta Carvente had some interesting inclusions in his deck, particularly Yellow Jacket and Adam Warlock. While the latter is often associated with Bast, another Series 5 card, trying to include more of a draw engine in a Zabu deck makes a lot of sense. With 6 4-cost cards in the deck, it can be night and day depending on whether you drew your Zabu or not, and this was the first time I'd seen Adam Warlock paired with Zabu, and it might be another card you should be considering in your Zabu decks going further future forward. Another exciting debate around Zabu is whether we want to play a card like Crystal in this deck. Personally, I'm a fan of America Chavez when it comes to reliability, as I'm looking to play Zabu on turn 3 more often than I am on turn 5, yet Crystal does allow us to dump our hand if we already found Zabu and get a refill. In this sense, the card is definitely contributing in more ways than Chavez would, and in this core, more combo-orientated deck, it isn't just about Zabu, but about using it to get shenanigans going around Darkhawk, so playing Zabu on turn 5 can still be pretty valuable. It can open up that signature line of Darkhawk into Rockslide on turn 6, and that can be enough to fight for 2 lanes all by itself. As mentioned a moment ago, there are many different versions of this deck floating around. It didn't feel like it was worth a full write-up of another Zabu deck, but Shuri is the other card here that is looking kind of bonkers with the Jungle Cat, as Neil Greenberth shows on their climb to the Infinite rank with this list they shared over on Twitter as well. Last but not least, we have an old standby making the climb nice and early this season with the Good Cards archetype with a few slightly different inclusions than before. Creativity is a great trait in Marvel Snap. I keep saying it week after week after week, but a solid deck will just be a solid deck and should lead to a good win rate, especially in a field where a lot of players are trying new things. So obviously, the Good Cards archetype doesn't really have the spice that the other 2 decks have brought to the table this week, but no matter the deck, reaching Infinite in the first days of the season is something to be proud of. The 2 cards catching my eye in this particular build are Shang-Chi and Magneto. The first card seems to make sense with against 2 of Zabu's best friends, Shuri and Darkhawk, both leading to 9+ power cards. Magneto, on the other end, seems great in a Zabu meta as it allows you to move around your opposing cards, reposition the power of their lanes efficiently to help you win games you might not be able to otherwise. It looks like we'll be seeing more of the Good Cards archetype in the coming season, as the deck really doesn't seem to have lost any step going into 2023. Maybe once the other decks are more refined, we can see the popularity of the most popular archetype in the game drop down. Until that time, it looks like this is the good old reliable for someone who doesn't know how to separate from the pack during the crazy first week of a season. Although there isn't really a reason to rush to the Infinite rank, and most of us usually rank up while trying different decks, making it so fast is very impressive, so kudos to these players. Obviously, I have a fondness for unexpected archetypes, and creative ideas leading to well-deserved cubes, and that's what I'm going to be looking for week after week when we put together this series. Nevertheless, even if it is with an expected deck like the Good Cards archetype, there is innovation to be found everywhere, and the level of play and focus needed to complete the climb so quickly is impressive in and of itself. Next week, we should be able to explore more refined archetypes and look at how players are adapting to a forming metagame. Zabu feels like a really nice shake-up so far, and I can't wait to see who wins the battle of the archetypes between Shuri and Darkhawk. Although, I'm personally a little bit disappointed about the Season 5 cards, the Series 5 cards that were announced for January, so I'm curious to see if anyone has found some upside to them and includes a card like Sauron in their deck following its release. If you want to be featured on this series in the future, there are a few ways you can do so. You can tag a member of the team over on Twitter at DenCCG, HowlingMines, or of course the Marvel Snap Zone account. You can come and join us in the community Discord server if you prefer. Thousands and thousands of players talking all things Marvel Snap down there 24 hours a day, and you can come and share the lists you make Infinite with, and we'll take a look at them as you do so. But until next time, Happy New Year. Hopefully you've had a great time, everyone. Good game all around. I've been HowlingMines. You have been amazing. Take care, and this has been Infinite Decks of the Week.